Welcome to the Reddit stories. r/Askreddit. What's a deep dark rabbit hole to research when bored? The saved section of your Reddit user profile. I've saved so much shit and then promptly forgot about it. Just like I'm going to do with this thread. Prion diseases. Every single one is weird and dark. It includes cannibalism and family curses. And deers walking onto legs. And industrial farming plus forced cow cannibalism. Fire disasters. And then never feel safe in an indoor crowded space ever again. There's actually video on YouTube of the Great White Disaster and it's utterly horrifying how incredibly quickly it happens, and seeing the people literally stuck in the doorway unable to get out as they burn to death. As someone who still goes to a lot of shows at small packed music venues exactly like that one, and other totally packed bars and clubs, I'm always constantly looking for exits to find the nearest escape path, and it always freaks me out anytime there's any fire in any indoor space. Candle/sparklers/pyrotechnics/etc. Mass hysteria. There are different kinds that have affected different cultures in different ways. Multiple times throughout history, groups of people have uncontrollably danced themselves to deaths. In other parts of the world, men can become stricken with the belief that their penis is receding into their bodies. It was often believed the only way to prevent this from happening overnight was for family members to hold their members, etc. Caving and cave diving accidents. Accidentally watched one on YouTube, then went down the rabbit hole. This led to some more parallel topics of horrible fates, bad deaths, etc. After few days, started getting disturbed sleep as this became my routine of watching before the sleep time. With self-restraint, finally I got out of it. Shipwrecks. Been absolutely obsessed with them the past few days. There's so much to discover and learn about, and so much corruption as well as just interesting circumstances that these huge machines go down in. And adding to that, technical diving accidents. Especially in shipwrecks. You can dive down to the sunken and reared area that wrecked because another enormous ship collided sideways into it. Ship and collect first class dinnerware as plunder, but people have died, seemingly becoming lost in the complete darkness of the holes inside, or user error in any capacity, such as not having the correct oxygen tank levels, leading to hallucinations and false confidence that makes you drown. The town of Skidmore, Missouri in the US. It's sort of a small topic, but it leads in so many different directions. It's most famous for the murder of the town bully. That's a mild name for him. He was horrible, in the middle of the day, on the main street, with a bunch of witnesses, but no one has ever been arrested. But there's also the later case of a woman who was murdered and her unborn baby stolen, and even later a teenager, who was related to the murdered woman, just disappeared and is thought to have been taken by a serial killer. All this in a town of fewer than 200 people. I'm not superstitious, but I also wouldn't move there. There is a documentary on Sundance about the bully, but the best introduction is a book called In Broad Daylight. From there, you just get farther and farther down tangential paths, trying to figure out what have happened. Less info on the two later cases, but still an internet black hole you can fall into for days. Religious cults. There's so many documentaries out there, literally weeks of entertainment. I spent like a solid month a year or two ago watching documentaries/YouTube videos about the Mormon Church. There's a crap ton of videos and articles about the various Christian fundie groups, cults, and once you get deep into the rabbit hole it's honestly scary. Like straight up sinister. Art forgery and fakes. I've been watching a BBC series called Fake or Fortune where people try to get their art validated as being by an old master they've had, Renoir, Monet, etc. The program goes into how both modern day and historic forgers use techniques to make a picture or sculpture look original. It sometimes also shows how corrupt the art validation world can be, with one episode showing overwhelming evidence that a picture was genuine, but the organization responsible for cataloging the original works of the artist refusing to acknowledge it. Interestingly, the head of that institute is now under investigation in France for hoarding €1 billion worth of missing artworks. I actually just went on one. It started with me going on r/drugs and looking at the subreddits, sorted by top of all time, for each of the drugs. Terribly fascinating stuff. Some of the accounts you see in particular are far worse than the worst warnings we've been given about heroin, meth, crack, etc. Although I have been on their respective subreddits as well. r/DPH in particular is a morbidly fascinating case study. a deliriant with seemingly no upsides and a horrific side effect profile. Yet the artwork about it and experiences people detail are artistically interesting, and I cannot stop reading the sub. I spent 3 hours on it yesterday. r/datura is also interesting, but has very little in the way of experience posts and has a lot of photos after you sift through for a while. Of course, nothing is more horrifying than reading the consistent posts from addicted redditors who tell you to stray away. A large portion of people on r/dph are dead, and the members of the sub actually keep a list that they post regularly. Note, never do these drugs. I'm not endorsing, nor would I ever do them myself. I read them as a cautionary tale to what happens when you allow yourself to succumb to this. If you have low impulse control, find a different rabbit hole. Cattle mutilations are kind of fucking weird. I figured it was like some kind of a cult group, but it doesn't really account for all of them. Aliens doesn't fit every case either. Those are two of the most popular theories. Some of the explored cases were treated as crime scenes. There were forensics done that absolutely could not explain how their bodies were cut open and looted of odd choice parts without leaving any kind of a trail. North Korea. This country lives in its own reality. You can spend hours, days, or even weeks following links to find out the details of their own version of everything we think of as universal. It's like they erased all of human history and made their own culture up whole cloth. They have their own version of communism mixed with religion and idol worship, their own way of dating, science, medicine, sex, movies. They even have their own version of fabric that evidently all clothing is made of that is only made and used in North Korea. Edit. The number of comments here echoing the North Korean party line is really fascinating, as is how many innocuous comments merely saying that they find North Korea interesting or a bit scary are downvoted to invisibility. Look into the history of the Mormon Church and its prophets, specifically Joseph Smith and Brigham Young. Adultery, polygamy, Masonic/satanic rituals, racism, aliens on the moon, and blood rituals. Those boys in their white shirts and bicycles don't tell you none of that. Marry a black person, and I on the spot, Brigham Young, who is named after ancestry. I once spent a full 36 hours researching my family history. I literally sat on my couch and traced my family back until they came from Europe. My kids were like WTF, but I would stop to make dinner and all. I just didn't sleep. Did I mention I was completely manic at the time and was more than obsessed? Cryptozoology. It's interesting to say the least, but there are so many things that make you question what is out there in the world that we haven't discovered yet. When I first got into it, I thought cryptids were more like Bigfoot and the Loch Ness Monster, but there are hundreds or even thousands of other weird and unusual sightings of creatures many haven't even heard of. Fascinating horror YouTube channel. Relatively short videos with tons of detail and interesting information about various incidents and accidents throughout history. Never want to be in a crowded space ever again thanks to these videos, as well as really appreciating how quickly fire can spread and how a lot of safety laws came into being. Mantises, how they fight, and how evolution bizarrely went off the norm to make these violent and alien-like creatures. Especially the mantis shrimp. That thing is pretty and insane. They have club arms that attack as fast as .22 caliber bullet boiling the water around them. And mantises straight up aim for the head and eat the brains out of prey alive. Some even hunt birds. Wolf attacks in Europe from the Middle Ages through the Enlightenment. Doesn't really happen anywhere on Earth anymore, but back then. So many. Plus, the amount of carnage a lone wolf can create in a small village is amazing and horrifying. I don't mean one by one over some extended period, but wolf shows up in the village, kills 8 people, and injures 5 before someone managed to pin it to the ground with a pitchfork. Sheer insanity. What happened to the Norse settlement in Greenland after Homo sapiens left the African continent and migrated east and west? The reunion of peoples who migrated in different directions would have occurred in Greenland around 1000 CE. A Viking and an Inuit stumbling across each other somewhere in that cold, isolated land. Missing persons and deaths in America's national parks and forests. The ones that didn't involve foul play are the more interesting ones to me. The debate between when you're lost in the forest to either keep moving or stay in one place to wait for help. People in either scenario have died. Geraldine Lage is a good example of this. A woman hiking the Appalachian Trail in Maine got off the trail and hopelessly lost. She hiked 2 miles off the AT, set up camp, and waited for help. She stayed at her camp for 26 days before she died of starvation and exposure. Even after extensive searches, she wasn't found until 2 years later. BTW, the correct method is to keep moving. Geraldine Lagay. Thank you.